introductions in a moment. First of all, wanted to pass on sentiments from our department director, Brenda Bateman, Dr. Brenda Bateman. She sends her regards to the group. She regrets she was unable to make this meeting. I think she's triple booked at this time. But she wanted to convey, very excited about this work as it represents the intersection of her water and land interests. She'll be monitoring as the discussions unfold and looks forward to hearing about the progress of our work group. Brenda has quite a background in water resources, so we're excited to have her input as well. Let's turn next to, before we get into just general introductions, Commissioner Porter, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background and your interest in this rulemaking?
Oh, thank you, Kevin. Absolutely. Yes, my name is Ellen Porter. I'm on the LCDC, and I am going to be the liaison for this rule advisory committee, and I'll be able to report back. My background is I've done environmental work for a few decades, I guess, and so I do have a particular interest in these types of issues, and so. So anyway, so I'm looking forward to it and looking forward to getting to know everybody a little bit.
Wonderful, wonderful. And as I was saying earlier, my name is Kevin Young. I'm a senior planner with DLCD. I've been with the department since 2018. Worked on a number of rulemakings, the middle housing rules, the climate-friendly, equitable communities rules, and now very happy to be working on the wetland rules as well. Prior to that, I have a bit of experience in local government planning. So I worked for a variety of cities, mostly in Oregon for over 20 years. Let's turn next to, let's go ahead and hear from introductions from Melissa, then Amanda, and then Jebra, and then we'll go around the room, and I want to hear a little bit from each of you. Go ahead, Melissa.
Thanks, Kevin, and hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Melissa Ahrens, Mid-Willamette Valley Regional Representative with the department. I've been with the department since 2022, and prior to that, I was a senior planner with Clackamas County for just about 5 years, so have local planning experience like Kevin. And I'm assisting the team because these issues surrounding this rulemaking came up frequently in my region, and so happy to be helping out with the team and assisting with this rulemaking. Okay, Amanda, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amanda Punton, and I'm the Natural Resource Specialist for DLCD, and helping local governments implement rules consistent with our Goal 5 is primarily the work that I do. And so I do have a lot of experience with local wetland protection codes and the intersection of our rules, excuse me, with Department of State lands, standards and regulations, and the kind of combination of how state wetland laws work along with our Goal 5 rules that support local wetland protection rules. So I'll hand it to Jevra.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I was very excited to see the list of, I am Jebra Brown. I'm the Aquatic Resource Planner at Department of State Lands. I don't know if you'd call it oversee, but I'm responsible for the statewide and local wetlands inventories and many other support to local planners. I'm excited to see a lot of familiar faces on the group, and I look forward to working with those I haven't worked with before.
All right, wonderful. Thank you. I'm going to just kind of call on three people sort of in order. And if you could just take a minute or two to introduce yourself and briefly share what's important for you in this rulemaking process. Oh,
Kevin,
Amanda?
Well,
Yeah.
Kevin, I'm just wondering if you want to get Jess and Matthew, and I think Kasaria is on.
My goodness. Yes, you're right.
Themselves.
I'm so sorry. The most important members of the team. Yes. Matthew Hampton and Casaria Taylor are both assisting us with this rulemaking effort. They're gonna keep me honest and make sure that we meet all of the rules and practices for doing rulemaking properly, which yeah, is very complicated. So really appreciate their help with that. And Jess here, we wouldn't be here without Jess because she's running this meeting. So hello, Jess. I don't know if you want to come on camera, you're welcome to, but don't feel that you have to. Thanks, Amanda.
I'm going to stay off camera, but I'm happy to meet you all. If you have any technical questions about the Zoom, please let me know in the chat. You can private message me if that's easier. But yeah, I'm here to help make sure everything goes smooth.
Jess, and thank you, Amanda, for the reminder. I'm sorry, I get ahead of myself. I too am just really excited about this group. We got such a variety of knowledge and experience in the room. I'm just really delighted to be starting this rulemaking. But I want to hear from you. So let's go to Stacy, Glenn, and Matthew first.
Hello, you all can hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm Stacy Connery. I am the principal planner with Pacific Community Design. We're a consulting firm that works primarily with residential developers who do master planning projects quite frequently within UGB expansion areas. And so we have been kind of trying to work in this kind of gray area where plans have been in place, but the local wetland inventory is not entirely in place yet, and trying to find ways to work within that space in a timely fashion. And so one of the things that I'm interested in is helping to achieve some clear direction as to what should occur in those instances and have a path forward, but also like balancing the needs to protect wetlands as well as to promote housing development.
Beautiful. Thank you, Stacy, and welcome. Glenn.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Glenn Fee. I'm Executive Director of Tualatin River Keepers. We're an advocacy organization that protects and restores the Tualatin River watershed. So the watershed is roughly Washington County with a little bit of Clackamas, Yamhill, and Multnomah sprinkled in there. And similar to what Stacy just referenced, we work with a lot of community organizations, community partners to protect clean water. Yet there's a lot of, especially with the push for more housing, which we know we need, there's a lack of clarity in among a lot of partners and jurisdictions around wetland inventory and rulemaking. And so this is an opportunity for our organization to be involved in it, for me to learn a little bit, and for also to hear different perspectives, which are obviously important to our work.
Fantastic. Thank you, Glenn. And I'm realizing my apologies. We have two Glens here. So to be fair, let's call on the next Glenn, Glenn Hamburg. Go ahead.
That's great. Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm another Glenn Hamburg. I'm a senior regional planner with Metro, the regional government for the Portland metro area. Some of my functions at Metro include administering the Urban Growth Management Functional Plan that has certain regulations or requirements and recommendations for our partner jurisdictions that intersect with wetlands. So that's something of relevance. And then otherwise, Metro is just generally interested in making sure that we're protecting natural resources that serve important ecological functions, including wetlands, while so at the same time making sure that there is some clear, streamlined processes for planning of urban development in our UGB expansion areas. We do a lot of work thinking about whether there's a need to expand the UGB and where best to do that. And so once a decision is made by our Metro Council to accommodate some anticipated growth, we really hope that the process that follows locally can move efficiently. And so making sure that all the rules align is valuable to us. Thank you.
All right, Matthew.
Hey everyone, my name is Matt Brown. I am co-founder of Mahonia Northwest. We're relatively new, I guess you would say, kind of housing development startup focused on primarily missing middle housing, and think specifically about cottage cluster development. I am actually, by background, I'm a landscape architect, and have worked in and out of both local government as well as in real estate development, real estate consulting. I think one of the things that we've certainly encountered over the last year or so as we've been looking at new development sites is that a number of the smaller communities that we're working in, where we're looking to annex some of the property we're interested in, are running up against this goal 5 issue of not having a local wetland inventory. And it's especially problematic, I think, for us in the realm of kind of our current housing crisis to have land that is development ready. In other words, we've already done a wetland inventory on it and found no wetlands, to have that held up on annexation, but also in some other cases where we have what I would call non-significant wetlands, think farmed areas with, hydric soils, but really no, existing value on the property itself, that those are also kind of hung up in this process. So we're looking for a way to streamline this reasonably, right, for land that was appropriately deemed as ready for development to bring into a UGB and to be annexed. So looking forward to working with everyone here.
Wonderful. Thank you, Matthew. All right, the next 3, I'd like to hear from Gerald or Murph, Philip, and Josh. Go ahead, Murph.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me. I see familiar faces here too. I'm a vice chair of the Clackamas County Planning Commission, have been on the commission for 7.5 years, almost 8. I'm former vice chair of the Sandy River Watershed Council before it went down. Also formed a group called the Sandy River Watershed Group, which formed a new watershed council. I'm not part of that currently. It's not in Clackamas County. I'm also part of the Mount Hood Corridor Wildfire Partnership. My residence is up in Rhododendron in the Mount Hood Corridor. I live in a community that is on the north and south side of the Sandy River, which is in this particular area is very subject to channel migration, which got my interest back in 2011. I started asking questions, ended up on a watershed council and kept asking those questions and ended up as chair of the Clackamas County Planning Commission. My goal is to protect water. My goal is to use what sort of resources we have now to battle the wildfire issues we have in our rural areas, and to think 100 years ahead, what's our water going to look like and what can we do now that people will say, thank God they did this, so we still have water. So thank you for letting me be with you.
Thank you, Murph. Let's turn to Philip next.
Philip Higgins, own a commercial real estate brokerage out here in beautiful wine country. Also on the Mid-Valley Regional Solutions Advisory Committee, as well as involved in multiple other committees and advisory positions around tourism, economic development, and also destination development for outdoor recreation projects. Very excited that the governor, in her roadmap to prosperity, is going to be directing state agencies to prioritize economic development, and would certainly love to see some outcomes through this rulemaking body that take that into first priority consideration.
All right, Josh, welcome.
Yeah, Joshua Smith, Planning Director here in City of Prineville. I'm also the treasurer on our local Crooked River Watershed Council. So I've been on there for probably, I've been here for 20 years, 6 years in the director position. I've been on the Watershed Council I was voluntold when I first hired here. So about 19 years on the Watershed Council. So I have a good understanding of the Crooked River Watershed Council and what they do. I'm also, it looks like I might be the only one on the east side in the group. So it kind of represents a little bit more of some of the uniqueness that we have on our side versus the valley. It's pretty easy to see a wetland on our side and know where it is and what it is and how to map it, how to set it aside and delineate it. versus maybe in the valley where it's a lot more difficult to assess. So bringing a little bit more of that eastern voice, hopefully to make things a little more efficient. If we can start doing business more on the fly, if you're looking at UDB expansions, I don't see any reason why you couldn't map those things out all at the same time instead of having to do an entire wetland inventory. Things like that just stop the process where it seems, at least on our side of the mountains, you could do that pretty efficiently at the same time. So kind of work through some of those. I'm hoping through the process I get a little more familiar with the actual state law too. I've been trying to brush up on my 660-23, but there's a lot there. So
There sure is, but you're in the right room for this. We've got Jevra and Amanda are both experts in different realms. So I think this is a space where we can all learn. I know I have lots to learn on this topic. I'm not going to pretend to be a wetlands expert. All right, next three folks I want to hear from: John and Charles and Sean.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Joan Van Staveren. I am the president and a senior professional wetland scientist with Pacific Habitat Services. And I've kind of got three hats, I think. I have been working on Goal 5 issues for 35 years in Oregon. I know it doesn't sound like it. But I have conducted about 40 local wetland inventories, and I've worked with Amanda and Jevra for many years. Very familiar with the Goal 5 process. And in fact, I was on the committee that came up with the significant wetlands criteria way back when. I'm also on the board of the Wetlands Conservancy, and you'll be hearing from Katie Ryan a little bit later. And I also work for residential developers, so I understand the issues that they have in trying to, we do a really good job of minimizing wetland impacts, and so I hear from them the frustrations that they have. So look forward to working with you all.
Thank you, John. Charles.
Thank you. Charles Bennett, Jackson County Planning. I've been working at the county for 22 years. I'm a long-range planner, work with the GIS side of things and tracking some of these inventories, work with cities on their urban growth boundary expansions, which there's been several in the last few years and probably some more coming. So I wanted to be a voice for the Southern Oregon region and glad to be here and thank you.
Glad to have you. Thank you, Charles. Sean.
Hey everybody, Sean Irvine. I'm the Assistant City Manager for City of Independence. We're a small town a little south and west of Salem. I've been with the city about 20 years. Before that, I actually was working with a nonprofit environmental group. Been on the Lucky Me Watershed Council for about 6 to 8 years, although I'm not on presently. So I kind of come at this from both sides. I've been involved in kind of community and economic development with the city for a long time, and so I'm going to classify myself as a dabbler in planning. So I will definitely be one of the ones asking stupid questions. So don't mind me. I think the goal is just housing. Still preserve the local environment, create jobs, employment land. I think that's kind of a side piece that we aren't really talking about out here. We're focusing on housing, but industrial land, wetlands are a major issue with industrial readiness as well. And then I think Independence, I believe, is actually one of the communities affected by this rule. We do not have a local wetland inventory. We would like to annex some land that's inside urban growth boundary for housing. And so we would like to see some efficient resolution to these kind of situations. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Next three I'd like to hear from are Kathy and Max and Jacob.
All right. Hi, I'm Kathy Majidi. I've been working on natural resource issues at the city of Gresham for 25 years. And because Gresham is one of 27 jurisdictions inside the metro regional government boundary, we actually implement our wetland protections in conjunction with Metro's Goal 5 program instead of having our own Goal 5 compliance code. So I recognize I'm bringing a perspective specific to a metro jurisdiction, and I am hoping to help ensure that whatever comes out of this process integrates smoothly into what we have for a Metro Title III wetland protection framework so that it's supporting our ongoing efforts to coordinate with Metro DEQ, DSL developers, And then just mentioning the same words that Glenn and Glenn both used, clarity is a big thing for us, clarity and predictability for our urbanizing area. We've dealt with some somewhat recent frustrations with some conflicts or delays relevant to local significant wetland criteria, actually under the DSL area of state regulations. But a few years ago, we were unable to protect about a 5-acre wetland, in part because the existing DSL local significant criteria no longer aligns with DEQ's current TMDL and water quality listing protocols. And that misalignment created an interpretation challenge that took us 9 months and many hours of attorney time to argue about. And it ended up with our city planning commission choosing to regard the wetland as not locally significant, as they were allowed to do under that language, in part because they felt the rules weren't clear and had therefore penalized the developer. So I'm supportive of any state efforts to identify and correct places where older regulatory language is no longer matching the contemporary resource protection processes that we have across all those different state agencies.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much, Kathy. Max?
Hi, everyone. My name is Max Carter. I'm the city planner for King City. So I'm also in the Portland metro area. About 6 years ago, we were awarded a UGB expansion that, when reaching full build out, will probably around double the size of the city. And there's a lot of wetlands within the UGB. So we've been working with DSL to get our local wetland inventory approved for about 18 months to maybe about 2 years since we began the process. And that's actually going to be going to a hearing this week at the Planning Commission. So we might be finally done getting our LWI adopted, but been having my elbows deep in wetlands stuff since I'm kind of facilitating the development and within the whole UGB for the city.
All right. Well, welcome. Jacob.
Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be part of this group and hear all these different points of view on this topic. I work with the Lane Council of Governments. I'm the planning manager. I've been with LCOG for about 20 years. And throughout that time, as a multi-public entity member agency, we do a lot of things. But one of the hats that I have had throughout my tenure here at LCOG has been natural resources planning. So we have a slightly more robust shop than I think a lot of COGs, where we provide a lot of natural resources support historically and currently. Part of that work has been doing wetland support, so helping a number of communities do local wetland inventories. And that sort of evolved into a fairly long-standing relationship with folks like Amanda and Jevra in developing through EPA grants, wetland program development grants, tools and resources to help do planning around wetlands. So a little bit more the policy side. So I've done quite a bit of policy work, and working right now with Jevra and Amanda, helping the city of Springfield on wetlands in the UGB expansion area, and also working with Jevra at DSL on some work to try to update local wetland significance language and to do better mapping of our wetland delineations and determinations. So super interested in this topic. I think because we work with so many interests, it's really about balance. I understand the values that are coming here in tension, and always have an optimistic lens that we can objectively find something that strikes a balance. So hoping to see something like that emerge from this group.
I think I think I can speak for the staff here to say that's our goal as well, Jacob. So thank you. Okay, last but not least, our final four. I'd like to hear from Brock and Alexandra, Katie and Ryan. And if there's anybody else I've left out, please don't hesitate to raise your hand and let me know. But I think that's all of us. Oh, Ezra, you're in that group. Yeah.
Hey everybody, this is Brock Nation. I'm the policy director at Oregon Realtors. Just finished up the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis rulemaking on Thursday, I guess, and hopping back into a new DLCD rulemaking on Monday. So busy all the time, but ready to get down to it.
Alexandra.
Hi, folks. Alexandra Ring, League of Oregon Cities. We represent all 241 cities across the state of Oregon. Happy to be here. We've got different folks affected in different ways, everything from, your biggest city at over 600,000 to folks with 5 seasonal residents. So span the whole gambit. Hopefully we'll get some clarity out of this. Thanks, folks.
Thank you. Katie?
Hi, everyone. My name is Katie Ryan. I am the Executive Director with the Wetlands Conservancy. Have the opportunity to work with John regularly, as he mentioned. We are a statewide land trust that focuses on wetland preservation, restoration, and conservation. And I am actually based in Bend, so I am on the east side, Josh, not quite up where you are, but most of our work is in the Portland region on the coast and then on the coast. And yeah, we're here today just to to follow along with this process. And we like to say we're the voice of wetlands, make sure that we're keeping the eye on wetland impact and not losing sight of that. So yeah, but we do work statewide, and yeah, happy to be here.
Cool. All right. And last, but not least, Ezra.
Thanks, Kevin. Hi, everybody. Ezra Hammer here. I'm a land use attorney at Jordan Ramus. I have the pleasure of also not only working for private side developers, both in an expansion context, but infill context as well. And we also provide some legal support to cities that don't have in-house legal counsel. So seeing some friendly faces here is lovely. I think our concerns, seeing both the municipal and the applicant side, are twofold. First, in the expansion process, the redundancy created by the fact that you have project-specific delineations, as well as Max described, the up to 2-year review process at the state level for the same or lesser delineation. So I think they're wanting to move to a world where the appropriate party is leading the delineation process, which I believe would be the city, supported financially by a project applicant. And then in the infill context, where we see the state kind of going through a wetland analysis after local land use approvals are granted and utilizing the same criteria, which are interpreted differently to determine wetland significance. We've seen unfortunate situations where a project will get approved in a jurisdiction that has Goal 5 or Goal 3 planning around wetlands in place. We'll go through things like alternative analyses and appropriate mitigation analyses to get their land use approvals. And then once that gets to the state, they'll be told that that analysis is incorrect. We think this poses kind of a big picture legal challenge for the state, where you have the states signing off on local programs to protect wetlands and then not deferring to the locals in the interpretation of their own codes. So we'd love to see a world where, again, the kind of lead agency is the local regulator, i.e. the city or the county, and the state kind of takes a hands-off role on reviewing individual applications, but rather spends more focus on determining whether the local programs meet the necessary requirements.
All right. And I just realized that a professional mistake. My boss is here, so I should allow him to introduce himself as well. Gordon, if you're available, please introduce yourself.
I was here late, Kevin, so don't feel you missed me. My name is Gordon Howard. I'm the Community Services Division Manager with the LCD, and we're looking forward to trying to resolve some of these issues with this Rulemaking Advisory Committee to go forward with rules for the Commission's review.
All right, thanks, Gordon. Let's go ahead and go to the slideshow. We've got a few things to talk through with you today. We'll have some homework for you later, but I don't think it'll be terribly onerous. And I get the sense that this group will enjoy that, actually. Let's go on and advance to the charge and charter slide. All right, so yeah, I'm just gonna kind of provide an overview of kind of what we're up to here. And just kind of big picture. We went to the Land Conservation and Development Commission in October and asked them to initiate rulemaking on this issue. Amanda will talk in much more detail about the issue and our proposed approach a little later in the meeting. But just kind of big picture, the commission directed us to follow a policy neutral approach here, which basically is to protect wetlands while allowing needed development outside wetland areas on an interim basis. Amanda will talk a little bit more about the problem. I think we've heard a number of you speak to it. I know a number of you have had personal experience with this, and that's part of why you're part of this group. But that's our overarching goal: protect wetlands while allowing needed development outside wetland areas. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so I know some of you, many of you have been on rulemaking advisory committees before, but some of you likely haven't. So just some basics about the role of the RAC. You're going to hear us use that term a lot: Rulemaking Advisory Committee, or the RAC. Again, the commission charged this group to provide feedback to us, to staff, regarding amendments to wetland rules as described in the committee charge. That's in your packets, I think page 3. The role of the RAC is to be advisory to staff. Basically, our work is as staff, is to prepare amendments to the existing rules in Division 23 for the commission to consider. The commission is empowered to actually adopt those rules, at which point they would have the force of law. But they want to make sure that as part of this process, we are hearing from all voices and we're getting the best people in the room to have that conversation. I'm really happy that I think we've done that. So the role of the RAC is to provide policy feedback and guidance. We're not necessarily it's not necessary for us to reach consensus. Obviously, where we can, all come to agreement. If we can, that's wonderful, and we will work towards that where possible. But we also want to hear a variety of voices. Your varied perspectives, your knowledge help us to make sure that we're not putting rules out that are going to produce unanticipated consequences. So this is a very important conversation that we're having. Throughout this process, until there will come a time once the Secretary of State's rules are posted, we basically send them to the Secretary of State to have them posted. And at some point, we can no longer accept feedback. But up to that point, your written suggestions are welcome at any time. If you'd like to recommend policies, language, direction to staff, that is perfectly welcome. In between meetings, obviously we want to have conversations. We want to build a shared understanding of what we're talking about. And a good share of our meeting today, I think, is intended to do that. Of course, as a rulemaking advisory committee, we must comply with open meeting, public record, and ethics laws. You should know this meeting is being recorded. It will be available on YouTube for any interested person to view. But also want to note that it's important that it is okay for any of you to reach out to staff if you have any questions or suggestions or what have you through this process. Amanda, Melissa, and myself are all very much available and happy to help with any issues or concerns that you have throughout this process. So next slide, please. In terms of how we behave in a meeting, I mean, this is fundamental. I think since the pandemic, everybody's had plenty of opportunities to be in a virtual space for this type of meeting. But again, basic etiquette of listening with respect, trying not to interrupt each other, allowing a balance of speaking time for a variety of perspectives. That's really important because, again, we want to hear it from everybody in the room, in the virtual room. Be tough on issues, not on people. This is not personal. This is trying to solve a collective problem for the benefit of the state of Oregon and the residents thereof. To discuss topics together, not in isolation. I mean, I think we're doing it correctly where we are able to put ideas out there and hear other ideas, or maybe suggestions about how to clarify something or what have you. That's where the real benefit of rulemaking comes. Seek to resolve differences, reach agreement where we can. Again, we may not at the end agree on everything, but it is our goal to get to that place as much as we can. Also, please bring up concerns as early as possible to avoid last-minute surprises. We want to make sure we've thought of everything as we are putting these rules together, and we have time to clarify and improve them if that is needed before we get to publication. You've seen the schedule. Our goal here is to have monthly meetings, this meeting, meeting in January, meeting in February, and then I think the next one is, I forget if it's late April, early May. That would be our last meeting. I'll describe how that works a little bit later, but we don't have a lot of meetings together, and our goal is to get a set of rules that everybody is pretty happy with to our commission for adoption by June of 2026. So ambitious schedule, but we're really wanting to affect this change as quickly as we can. If you could please attend each meeting, we very much encourage that. You can also catch up on meetings you've missed on YouTube, but I am really happy to know we've got everybody here today. That's wonderful. So thank you. Appreciate your prioritizing in this busy season, joining us. We'll also have action minutes from each meeting, so be sure to review those as part of the packet. Make sure that we've understood input that we've heard. Again, these are going to be fairly brief. We don't have a lot of staff support, so this team will basically be kind of coming up with summary minutes of what the conversation has been about. Next slide, please. Okay, why don't I pause there? If there are any questions before we get into framing issues, any questions about the RAC role or anything that I've just talked about, go ahead and raise your hand. If there aren't, we can move on. All right, seeing none, let's go ahead and turn to Amanda to frame the issue for us. Thank you.
All right. Listening to introductions, I kind of heard a bit of a range of understanding of how our Goal 5 rule for wetlands is supposed to work and how it relates to state and federal wetland protections. And I'm only going to spend a little bit of time on this, but this is an issue that would be good for additional phone calls or emails if people want to get a more solid base into how these different approaches to wetland identification and protection work. So first I want to talk about how the Goal 5 wetland piece is supposed to work within how the rule was written in 1996, how it continues to be implemented as best as it can since then. And so I'll say that, so the Goal 5 wetland rule requires local wetland inventories. Now, a local wetland inventory is not a delineation. It's ideally a citywide, closer look at where the wetland boundaries are, but those are still going to be approximate boundaries because the local wetland inventory does not have to have site access to complete. It's better if site access is granted, but we can't guarantee site access is granted. So it's a protocol that works even if someone can't get directly on the land. The function of the local wetland inventory is twofold. One, it helps better identify where a state or federal wetland removal fill permit might be needed. And two, part of the local wetland inventory is a wetland assessment, and that distinguishes what we call significant wetlands from non-significant wetlands. And the difference there is higher functioning wetlands are significant wetlands, and higher functioning would come in different categories. So like flood retention, so hazard mitigation, groundwater recharge, so important for both aquifers and for providing cold water refugia, or not, that's not the right word, but cold water, like providing cold water into surface waters to help keep that water at a temperature that fish and other critters can live in. And habitat, so the wetlands can provide important habitat. They can also provide some stormwater treatment, kind of like natural sponge and filtering of stormwater. So those are the functions that get rated as higher or low or medium level of functioning, and then that's how a locally significant wetland is identified. So then in this middle green rectangle here, when a local government has a local wetland inventory, they've adopted local protections for significant wetlands, then a similar, the tool of wetland delineations and upland determinations that you might use when you're trying to figure out if you need a state wetland removal fill permit. The same tools can be used there for identifying whether the local code applies. And the difference between a local code and the state and federal permitting rules is state and federal permitting work from a no net loss structure, whereas a local wetland protection overlay zone will often say you just can't develop here. It's not a matter of developing and mitigating. This is an important wetland. It's providing an important function for our city, and so you just need to keep development out of this wetland. So I guess that brings us to the third rectangle here. So significant wetlands is no development or very limited development in those areas. And then other wetlands just are the state and federal removal fill permit requirements would apply to them. And if there was ever, within the local limits of what can happen in a wetland, if there was some development that could occur within the significant wetland overlay, then certainly that would also have to comply with whatever state or federal permit requirements applied to that wetland. Next slide, please. So as we've been talking about introducing this rulemaking, the way the current rule works only for the time when a UGB is amended and you have a new UGB expansion area, there's a requirement, not in this Goal 5 wetland rule, but in the Goal 5 applicability rule, which says that when a resource site is known to exist in a UGB expansion area, then you have to apply Goal 5. If it's a wetland, applying Goal 5 means applying the Goal 5 wetland rule. Applying the Goal 5 wetland rule is a local wetland inventory. So that time it takes to complete the local wetland inventory has been causing delays for new development in these new urban areas, which we think could proceed in upland areas. Next slide. So this slide and the following one will kind of talk about proposed approach. This one is a bunch of words. The other one has some pictures. So what we brought to LCDC and what we got approval for, so essentially the scope of this rulemaking, is to create an optional pathway after a UGB expansion, an optional pathway for a city to comply with Goal 5. And it would describe a protocol to assure that all wetlands are protected by the local code until the city transitions to a full Goal 5 wetland program. And the reason why that protecting all wetlands is necessary, if we're going to keep this policy neutral, is that until we know which are the significant wetlands, we basically need to protect all wetlands. So then once we find out what the significant wetlands are, the local government code can release the non-significant wetlands. But if we did it some other way, we wouldn't have a way of knowing which wetlands were significant earlier on. So that's the scenario that we are trying to work within. So what this would do would be the rule, and thus through local code, would allow development in upland areas. And this last point here, actually, I'm not going to spend much time on, but this is something we'll hit more in the next RAC meeting. I'll touch on a little bit about how the data available for having a good idea of where a wetland exists has evolved quite a bit since 1996. And so we would like this rule to recognize that and reflect use of available data in a way that makes sense for applying this rule. Next slide, please. So this is the picture I promised, the proposed approach. So here's a situation where the picture on the left is imagining a UGB expansion area from looking at the statewide wetlands inventory. We know that there are hydric soils in the area and have a pretty good sense that there's likely going to be wetlands within these hydric soils. So the UGB would be amended here somehow, which is what we need your help figuring out. Somehow we would get to a point where this area would be looked at with either probably a delineation or looking at using determinations of uplands, and then figure out where the wetlands are, and then basically prohibit wetlands, prohibit development in those areas, and allow development to proceed in upland areas. You will see later that when we talk about prohibiting development in all wetlands, we have proposed a caveat to allow utilities to traverse a wetland if that was needed in order to serve upland areas. So, and then these local wetland protections would remain in place until a full Goal 5 program was adopted. So that would be completing the LWI and adopting local protection measures for significant wetlands. Next slide, please. So actually, these are our questions for you, but first let me pause and see if what I've just described as the general framework for the approach, if that raises any questions for the group.
Amanda, I have a quick question. This is Josh from the city of Pineville. When you said hydric soils, so when they're on site and you know the hydric soils are there, aren't there two other categories that create the wetland? Like there's 3 items that make a wetland. Is that?
Yes. Yeah, you're talking about the definition, like a regulatory definition used for like DSL permitting, and
Right.
which then can also translate into the local code for protection. But before, in order to, and maybe John or another wetland scientist can help with this, but in order to really determine that whether a piece of land meets that full wetland description or definition, you need on-site access to that land. And so we are talking at a kind of a planning, advanced planning stage where we won't have access to the property. So eventually when the local code is protecting a wetland, then you will have the 3 criteria for what a wetland is. But previous to that, possibly we need to use a slightly different approach for understanding where wetlands are very likely to occur. So that's what the hydric soils does. And the addition of the hydric soils layer is newer to the statewide wetlands inventory. And I'm going to take a wild guess, Jeffrey, but I'm going to say 7 years ago. And it's been very helpful to flag when wetlands are going to be an issue. Whereas before, without the hydric soils layer, at least over here in the valley, and I don't know what it's like in Eastern Oregon so much, but the statewide, the National Wetlands Inventory, which is the kind of the first original layer, let's say, of the statewide wetlands inventory, didn't cover the entire state of Oregon. So by adding that hydric soils layer, the statewide wetlands inventory can flag wetlands that would not otherwise be flagged based on the national wetlands inventory.
So theoretically, if you did have access, so through somebody's trying to develop or do a UGB expansion or something like that, you could potentially flag it really early that it's not, and pull it off kind of in the process.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Kevin?
I just wanted to, one other thing, that we've been thinking about with this interim, sometimes I'll describe this as an interim step. So what we do before we have an LWI and a Goal 5 program adopted, the benefit of this approach, or one benefit, is that if we are incrementally allowing development in upland areas, we can use the delineations or the determinations of uplands to inform the LWI and help to develop that LWI as we're allowing some development outside of those wetlands, which I think is kind of, I heard some concerns about duplication of effort, and I think if we can do this right, that could reduce the incidence. I won't say it's not going to happen at all, but just to be aware of that aspect of it.
Can you remind me, or is that a publicly accessible like layer that I can find somewhere, or is that something you guys have in-house?
Is the hydric soils layer, Sean? Is that what you're asking about?
Yeah.
The hydric soils
Yes.
layer is part of the Oregon statewide wetlands inventory, which is available online through DSL's website.
Great, thank you.
All right. I can keep going, but we might go really fast if we don't get more questions here. So,
Another question then. Sorry. So just so I'm clear on what the process we're talking about. So you've got this map of hydric soils, and the sort of the proposal is that is the just stay out of these areas and you should be okay. I guess was somewhat what I'm hearing, but then theoretically yeah, go ahead.
Well, thanks for that question. Melissa, could you go back to the previous slide? This is, Sean, is an illustration of a possible scenario. We might have a scenario where the statewide wetlands inventory is actually showing a wetland as opposed to hydric soils. And here, I think there is a little bit of a, tiny green spot up in the top right-hand corner of that rectangle, and there's a blue spot down in the lower portion of that rectangle where what the statewide wetlands inventory is presenting is, this is a wetland, or this one kind of wetland or a different kind of wetland. So the reason I think why this example shows hydric soils is because it's when less is known, but even if the statewide wetland inventory is showing a wetland, where since that information comes from if there has not been a local wetland inventory, the information showing that wetland comes from the national wetlands inventory. So you can imagine how kind of rough that data is, and not really designed to function as the planning tool that we would like to have. And so the local wetlands inventory is that planning tool that helps cities understand better where the wetlands are, both for staying out of them if they're providing really important functions for that city, or for recognizing what constraints that will pose when somebody comes in for development, because if development is allowed there, the removal fill permit will still be needed, and mitigation to achieve no net loss will be required, and that takes time and expense.
So I guess what I'm wondering is, so this is clearly sort of a very broad first pass, but then it would move to a local wetland inventory eventually, and maybe this is for a later part, but like, I guess what additional work, because I mean, it makes sense you would use soil maps as part of a local wetland inventory, but I guess like what else would go into doing a local wetland inventory, beyond sort of this initial layer that we're sort of talking about as sort of the exclusion zone.
Let's see, maybe if either Jever or John could take a few minutes to explain what goes into a local wetland inventory? Is that possible? John, since you've done so many of them, can I ask you to
Sure. Yeah,
chime in here?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So hydric soils are just one of the ingredients. It's hydrology and vegetation to determine where a wetland is located. And when we do a local wetlands inventory, as Amanda said, we actually look at the National Wetlands Inventory mapping, which generally is inaccurate, especially in the valley, because they never did on the ground or very little on the ground surveys for wetlands. It was basically on aerial photographs. And as somebody mentioned in the introduction, identifying wetlands on the west side is more difficult because you have agricultural fields, and although they had been farmed for many, many years, nevertheless, they may have wetlands in them and often do have wetlands on them. And so when we do a local wetlands inventory, we look for those criteria through aerial photo mapping. We have LiDAR data now, which is detailed topographic information. We have as Amanda said, the hydric soils mapping. But I want to say, though, that even though it's a good tool, it is not completely accurate. There are soils, for instance, in the city of Gresham, there's a couple of soils that are not listed as a hydric soil, but nevertheless, we often find wetlands located in those soils because they have a restrictive layer just below the surface that often kind of pools water in the upper surface of the soil layer. So I'm getting into the weeds here, but there are tools that we use, and we can do a pretty accurate determination of where wetlands are located, even if we don't have access to the properties. When I first did a delineation or inventory, I should say, it was back in 1990, and I've done many since then. And I would definitely say that the accuracy has increased because of the tools that we have available. But none of them are as good as getting actually onto the property and being able to put a shovel in the ground, look at the property actually in person.
Thank you. And Trevor, do you want to add something to what John just said? I'm just thinking I want to maybe do that before we move to Matthew's question.
Yeah, well, John, of course, explained the process quite well. I was just going to, I wanted to drop into the chat the document that explains the layers that are on the statewide wetlands inventory and some of those limitations so that people would better understand what you're talking about. But I could, the chat is unenabled. So I guess I could send it to you guys later and you could share with people.
Okay, great, thank you.
I'm sorry, but I'm jumping the queue here, but I understood Sean's question to be a little bit different. And I could be mistaken, but I think what he was saying was, if we're doing this interim process, would we assume would we just say no development in areas with hydric soils? And I think what we're thinking about is not necessarily that, but that development would be allowed in upland areas, which would require either a determination of upland or a delineation so that we know either there's no wetland here or we're avoiding it in that interim phase before we get to the local wetland inventory.
All right, great, thank you, Kevin. Matthew?
Sure. I'm just probably building on Sean's question here a little bit, but we imagine that area that's shown on the map has actually gone through a wetland delineation. How does that change anyone's thinking, or does it change anyone's thinking around how you proceed in that area? In other words, you probably have more detailed information than a local wetland inventory would provide. And so does that change the process? Does it accelerate the process? Are you able to make decisions faster about what's possible in this area and what's significant, what's not, things like that?
Okay. So let's say, instead of saying all of what's marked on this in this illustration as hydric soils, let's say 30% of it ended up being wetland. You'd find out what 30% was because you would do a delineation. So someone would get onto the ground, complete the steps the protocol for doing a delineation, it would be reviewed by DSL. If they said, yep, you did that delineation right, then you would know where the wetland was and you would know what to avoid, and then you would know where the upland was and you could build in that upland area. Now, the reason why that can happen more quickly than doing a local wetlands inventory is that the local wetlands inventory includes the assessment phase, which will take time, and it takes time for the wetland consultant and it takes time for DSL to review it. So by working off of delineations, and we can also talk about something called a determination of upland, those can happen more quickly. I mean, they're still seasonally dependent. At least I don't know about the upland determination, but certainly a delineation, I think you still need to have some wet, it's not going to happen in the middle of summer, let's say, or if there's snow on the ground, it's not going to happen when there's snow on the ground. So you have some seasonal considerations for it. But once you get the wetland professional out there, it can be done. And then the review process at DSL is actually, that's prescribed in rule, the timing for getting a approval from DSL on the delineation. So that approach is faster than the whole LWI and approval and local adoption of a Goal 5 program. It's just a faster approach.
I just wanted to add, Amanda, that also having done those delineations automatically become mapping within the LWI, and they're already approved mapping. So that really speeds the review of the LWI along because it's one less thing for us to look at.
Right, great. Yeah, presuming that the LWI will be being worked on over this kind of interim period, then what Jever's saying is that time and expense isn't lost because it's fed right into the LWI for eventual completion of that LWI. The other thing is LWI will need to be done for the entire UGB expansion area, whereas these delineations and avoidance could maybe be done annexation by annexation or possibly property by property that's seeking development. We can talk about that later. Is that good, Matthew?
Sorry, can you just repeat that last bit? So the LWI can be done.
The LWI is required, I mean, by the rule right now, the LWI is required to be done for the entire UGB expansion area, whereas the delineation and avoidance of wetland approach could be done on an annexation by annexation footprint, or possibly a proposed lot for development footprint. So
Okay,
another
understood.
reason why it would go faster. Glenn?
Thank you. Checking a couple of different things. One thing I just want to raise at the outset that we've been thinking about at Metro and that maybe came up in with King City that Max maybe be able to identify is that the existing regulations talk about or are triggered by, in some cases, a PAPA for a UGB amendment. And in Metro's always special circumstances, it's Metro that is amending our UGB for the region. And it's only after the UGB is amended that a city, or in some cases a county, might be doing the comprehensive urban planning for that space. And so we've just wanted to flag that maybe through this process, we can sort of clarify what in Metro's case would be sort of the regulatory trigger for this.
Thank you. All right, thanks for all those questions. I know people are listening if I get questions, so that's good. All right, let's try the next slide. All right, so you will hear, I'll tell you now, but we'll talk more about it later. We meaning staff at DLCD, have been cogitating on this issue for 2 years now, I think. And so we've discussed different ways we think this approach could be incorporated into rule, but we hit places where we have questions about how best to achieve this in rule. So these are the questions that we will need to get answered in order to proceed with getting a solid draft of a rule. So what details should the rule provide on the structure of a voluntary avoidance program? And some of that we've kind of been talking about here. What should the rule require as a commitment when a city opts to implement a wetland avoidance program? So the UGB is amended, and we are looking at that UGB amendment. We know there's a wetland in the expansion area. What should DLCD require as a commitment? So what should the rule require as a commitment that the city says, all right, we're gonna use this optional program, use delineations to identify wetlands, allow development in uplands, and then eventually so how do we know that will actually happen? And then this question, what should the expectation for a city's transition from the optional wetland avoidance program to a full Goal 5 wetlands program? And here I should say that when staff at DLCD was envisioning this optional program, we've always talked about it as an interim program, something that can happen to allow development in uplands while the local wetland inventory process is being worked on and completed. We've been asked by the governor's office to keep this question a little bit open, like maybe think of scenarios where a city might not transition to a full Goal 5 wetlands program. So just something to think about. But when we do think a city needs to transition to a full Goal 5 wetlands program, what should there be a timing for that? Or is it just motivation that would open up the non-significant wetlands to development enough to nudge the city towards adopting the full Goal 5 wetland program? We just have a lot of questions around this transition issue. And then this last one is the one I mentioned a little bit ago about improvements to statewide wetlands inventory. Oops, man, Jever, I am so sorry. That wetland is singular. It should be plural. Yeah, and again, I think this is more of a conversation for another day, but we will want to be talking about how to recognize these better data in implementing a Goal 5 program. Josh?
Yeah, so I think we have so many different layers going on here. I guess first, what's defined as a full Goal 5 wetland program? Is that a local wetland inventory adopted by the state and we're operating ourselves? Isolated from what I'm looking at here, which is the DSL map.
Yep.
That's
so
what that is.
It's not adopted by the state. It is
recognized.
It is recognized by the state and incorporated into the statewide wetlands inventory. So wherever there is a local wetlands inventory, the statewide wetlands inventory has better data because that was collected in the wetlands, the local wetlands inventory.
There might be go ahead.
I was just going to finish but the local government adopts the wetland inventory, and then the way the Goal 5 rule works is that when, well, there's a couple things. So the local wetland inventory becomes the what informs the local wetland land use notification. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah.
I was going to talk a little bit more about that later. But so basically it informs when a city is required by statute to notify DSL that there could be an impact to a wetland. And then the other is that the local wetland inventory will identify significant wetlands. And when a local government has recognized a significant Goal 5 resource, then they have to finish the Goal 5 program, which means to either adopt a safe harbor protection for that resource site, or to go through the ESCE analysis, which is an analysis of the
Easy,
the economic, social, environmental, and energy consequences of a decision to allow, limit, or prohibit conflicting uses with that resource site. So they either adopt a safe harbor, do an ESCE to inform a local protection program, and then adopt that local protection program.
And so we did this all back in 2009. Apparently, it didn't get recognized by the state. I don't know why. But I have all my rules and I have all my things and I have my maps. I just assumed the state wetland inventory was used by everybody. And it is mandatory. We have to actually adopt it to use it because if it seems like most of the stuff is already mapped. So say I'm expanding a UGB, I should be able to look on that map and go, there's nothing there. Maybe through that UGB process, DSL can then look at it and say, I think there might be something here, circle it, and then move on. And then that's what, and so like this stuff can happen on the fly. And I would expect the state agency to actually step up and say, this is where we want to look, mark it. Maybe it goes on the state map as that piece, that implementing piece for the avoidance program. And then that gets identified during development and delineated, and maybe it goes away, or maybe it gets integrated. And that's kind of the process. So you just want to keep moving to that delineation because nothing really happens until development happens. So it's like, how do we create or change? Because I'd hate to create a whole nother program in this division, just edit the existing division to allow that progression to happen on the fly. So it's not like this separate thing we got to think about later. It goes to the next step. You know what I mean?
I think I know what you mean. Let me say that the rule that's been in place since 1996 requires local wetland inventories. Now, in 1996, when cities were still going through periodic review, then at their next periodic review, they would have done a citywide local wetlands inventory. And maybe that's what happened in Prineville. Maybe, well, no, 2009, it's a little bit late for that. But, maybe you did it, but then because.
We did it on our own.
Okay, all right. Why it wasn't adopted, why you don't have local protections for the significant wetlands, I can't speak to it without looking at
We do.
Okay.
We have our own protections to what I think are significant wetlands.
Okay.
We don't really try to develop our wetlands at all.
Mhm.
We do have a few little minor ones that I think could probably be taken off, and it's very similar to what I see on the state. What I'm thinking of is those communities that maybe don't have one, or even my community where we expand a UGB and say there's a farmed field and there's a little drainage area. It's locally we'll know it's just the low point where the irrigation water is channeling through and it goes to the major wetland, but it's not a wetland itself. But DSL might say, you know what, we want to look at that later. So let's just circle it, whether I have a local wetland inventory or not. And we're going to let that UGB process move forward. And then that tees up that local, whether it's city property or whether it's county property or private property, tees them up to say, you need to go delineate that or look at it and get it on the state inventory, whether you have a local one or not.
So I think that's what we're suggesting, but
it sounds like what you're suggesting.
Yeah,
I think in having that progression, I think would help. But I don't want to create another program, just make that part of the system.
Right. So when we get to the organization of the rule that I'm thinking about, we can talk about that. It would fit within the existing rule. What I don't want to miss here is that a delineation and adding information to the state wetlands inventory through a delineation does not capture all that a local wetland inventory does, because you don't have the assessment. And so you're not making a distinction between significant and non-significant wetlands. So you don't know when the local government needs to step in and say that, yes, there's state wetland removal fill laws, and in this particular wetland, you can't develop anyway. So we just have to remember to have both. And that's getting back to this policy neutral directive for this rulemaking, is that if we were to completely relieve cities from doing a local wetland inventory in these UGB expansion areas, I don't see how that would be policy neutral. And so that's why we're trying to figure out a way to have the local wetland inventory happen, sometime down the road, but meanwhile, allow the delineations to inform where development can occur in upland areas.
Right. And I think, yeah, I see what you mean. So local wetland inventories are going to be tough for most small. They're just never going to do them unless the state pays for them, which is
it is true.
generally what happens.
Yeah, we've been getting money. We have money now. Hopefully we'll get money next
Right.
year.
And I've actually
slowly
applied
chip
for
away
that
at
to
this.
update mine, but it's like, I think you can do these, whether they have a local wetland inventory or not, allow these projects to move forward and just do an isolated one. So I guess I go back to my original question is the state inventory map the legal map people should be using if they don't have the local?
For applying DSL permit laws, yes. But the
not for
state
develop-
wetland map isn't about local wetland protection.
Interesting. Because I would have always just used that. That's how I've just kind of operated.
Mm-hmm.
If there's a wetland on the map, which we've kind of adopted that since the 94 map we had, we just don't develop it.
Right. Well, if you have a local wetland inventory, and if, let's say, if all your wetlands are locally significant, then that would be how it would play out. But that's not going to be the case everywhere, and it might not be the case for you. Let's take a look at that separate and see how
I'm trying
it's
to
working
create
in your
a
city.
streamlined path so you can just keep moving is what I'm trying to think about.
Right. Thanks. Kevin?
Josh, I just wanted to clarify one thing, and maybe I misheard you, but I just want to be clear that there's nothing in the current rules that would prohibit a UGB expansion decision based on wetland presence or not. Where the rules come into play is the point where land is annexed, zoned, and developed. That's the point where our rules come into play, but wetland presence doesn't delay or preclude UGB expansions themselves. It's just that once you make that decision, part of the planning that you do for that UGB expansion area should include, I think this was the presumption under the original rule, should include looking at important environmental resources and putting in place a protection program. We're just looking at an interim solution to, again, protect wetlands while allowing development outside of wetland areas.
Well, but on top of that, I think Jerva might come in here because we were doing a UGB expansion not too long ago, and that actually came up because our study area, it just happened to be in the study area, but if it was outside our study area, I think they were saying we needed to do an inventory of that site.
I think that what you're going to hear is we have reason to believe that wetlands are present in your UGB area. And so please understand, under the way the rules currently operate, before development can occur, this stuff needs to happen. But it's not no, you can't expand the UGB in that area. It's just the process that would follow after that. Yeah. Yeah.
So go to Ezra.
Thanks so much, Amanda, and thanks for this presentation. I think I'm tracking what you're putting out there, so appreciate that. As a point of clarity so we understand kind of in this world what would be happening in upland context. Just want to understand the area that we're specifically talking about, which couldn't be developed in the context until an LWI was put in place. Is that what sort of buffer are we talking about here, just so that we can get a good understanding of the area that would remain undevelopable until an LWI was adopted?
Although Metro might have a different answer to this because Metro has requirements for wetland buffers. Most cities do not. The safe harbor protection for significant wetlands does not include a buffer. So a city would need to go through an ESE in order to add protections for an impact area or a buffer around a wetland. And I've only seen that happen. I think I've seen it happen once. So if I'm going to say from the way I'm thinking about this, and I don't do delineations or upland determinations of uplands, but if it was a delineation, then you know that you could develop any place outside of that delineated wetland boundary. if you used a determination of upland, which I think is a good option in some places because I think it's a little maybe less expensive, and correct me if I'm wrong, wetland consultants in Jevra. But one issue with a determination of upland is that it's limited to a 2-acre maximum area. So that could work in some instances and not work in other instances. And I think a delineation of or a determination of upland might be a little fuzzier wetland boundary. So you might be staying further away from the wetland than if you did the actual delineation.
Okay, can I ask a quick follow-up here?
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, thanks, Kevin. Okay, so that's helpful. So again, in the context of a delineation, we understand the non-developable area. I think what might ask for consideration kind of is that is the consideration of a safe harbor provision, kind of akin to what you're talking about here, but making it making sure that it's broadly applicable, so that if a jurisdiction didn't have that setback in code, there could be a safe harbor provision they could rely on without forcing a project applicant to go through the delineation process. Again, I'm thinking about that kind of development context where every dollar spent on analysis, could lead to something not getting built. And if there was a safe harbor provision there, then that might provide that extra level of protection.
Okay, I'm going to mark it down that way, but I think what you're talking about is a determination of upland. So determination of upland will tell you where you can build without identifying necessarily the actual wetland boundary. Sean. Oh, actually, Jevra, were you following up on something I just said maybe incorrectly?
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. So a delineation not only shows you precise within 1 meter wetland boundaries, but also shows where uplands are. A determination of upland says that the entire study area, that entire up to 2 acres that you're studying, has no wetlands or waters. So it's as Amanda said, it's less expensive because there are no wetlands or waters to delineate on that area. So they both serve to map where uplands are, because the delineation is showing where the wetlands and waters are, and therefore the areas that you would avoid. I hope that helps.
Thank you. Sean?
Thanks. Two questions. One, I guess, is the stuff we're talking about right now the kind of things we're supposed to be trying to decide with this process? Like the sort of the determination of upland and where you can and can't develop using this sort of skip the queue process, or kind of while you're working on the LWI process.
Well, we've been given direction by our commission to describe within the rule what we're calling a wetland avoidance program that can stand until a full Goal 5 wetland protection program is adopted. So we are looking for how to filling in the details for that, which have to do a lot with how a rule speaks to a local government so they know what needs to be done, probably mostly within their code, possibly something within their comp plan, and when those things have to happen. Did I get your answer your question well enough?
Exactly what I was wondering. So totally different topic, and this is a little far afield, but just I want to mention it because it's been a pet peeve of mine. But alignment between wetland work and UGB expansions. I was just looking at our UGB or our wetland inventory map, and it's just a giant splotch of brown. And so, when we go to do a wetland or a UGB expansion, I think, alignment with a local wetland inventory or some other process to say, all right, we want to bring in this much land, but okay, 50% of that is going to be wetland, and you really realistically can only mitigate a certain amount of that, and some of it's going to be significant and all these other things. So therefore, we actually need to bring in more than we might otherwise sort of need, quote unquote, to bring in. So I just kind of want to throw that out there. I think it's probably a field from this particular committee's responsibility, but that's just something that I think is important to keep in mind in terms of like housing land availability and whether it's technically developable and but you may not practically be able to mitigate all the wetlands on the property, and then that's going to limit your actual developable ground.
Yes, it is a very important point, and it is somewhat outside of our Division 23 rules. That kind of lives in our, if you care about numbers, our Division 24 rules, which is about how you decide to where your urban growth boundary is going to be expanded. So there is a little bit of an iterative process built in, where there's a lot of good reasons to bring land into a UGB, and some of those lands will end up being determined unbuildable. And so next time there's a UGB expansion, you will recognize that those constraints in that UGB expansion, but very important and not what we're able to do in this Goal 5 rule. Thanks. Murph.
Thank you. Question about delineated wetland, delineated upland. Is there a buffer zone between them, or are they tight? Is there a habitat protection area?
So when I answered the question that Ezra asked about a buffer area, in the back of my mind, I was thinking, well, in this rule, we could say that you delineate a wetland and then add a buffer area until you complete your full Goal 5 process. But right now, because the way the Goal 5 rule works is that a city's local wetland protection program does not have to include a wetland buffer. So how do I say this? So neither a local wetland protection program nor the state wetland protections or requirement for removal fill permit necessarily apply in a buffer outside a wetland. That's different in the metro area because the Title 3 has a protection area around wetlands buffer area. But I'm trying to see how I can address that question in less of a bureaucratic kind of way. I mean, maybe I'll just go back and say that I think we do have to be policy neutral in this rulemaking. So if we were to consider a buffer, it might need to be a relatively small buffer. And when the full Goal 5 program gets adopted, recognize that does not require a wetland buffer. So, we're kind of just stuck with that right now with the way the rule is written.
Wouldn't it be to the advantage of the development to have a buffer?
Oh, well, there's always voluntary. I mean, yeah. I mean, when people do their site design, they can stay back from the wetland edge as much as they, as much works for the development that they need to provide. But that's different than what they're required to do.
Okay, thank you.
Josh?
Yeah, that's interesting to hear because I remember when we went through our wetlands, we did apply buffers. And I seem to remember they were the state's safe harbor buffers. So I don't know if this changed or not, but it was to prevent us from having to do more detailed analysis if we chose these certain buffers, and then it was fine.
I think I know what you're talking about. So remember that a local wetland inventory is not a delineation. So a local wetland inventory boundary is a fuzzy line. And depending on when the LWI was done, there's different approximations, for what we think that line represents. And I think if it's a newer LWI, like post 2004, somewhere in there, then it's the local wetland inventory boundary is supposed to be within plus or minus 3 meters of an actual wetland boundary. So I like to refer to that as the area of uncertainty. So sometimes we've told cities that if their code says if you stay, we change it from 3 meters to, non-metric. You stay, let's say 30 feet, from the
From the
local
inventory boundary? Oh,
from the
okay.
inventory boundary, then you don't have to do a delineation to figure out where that actual boundary is. But if they're going to try to get close to that that wetland boundary, then the city will would need to require delineation so you know where your protection
Okay.
overlay
We're,
actually applies.
because we're doing both. We're doing
Okay.
delineation for development. We do a delineation, then have a setback. And to get back to like Ezra's kind of comment, I think his concern was more of, yeah, can we do just that? Have a local wetland inventory and have a kind of fuzzy area and just let that be. Or are we in the situation where we are trying to prove a negative? So you don't want to get into a situation where they're saying, well, we think there's wetlands there. And then they're like, prove that there isn't. And you're basically trying to prove a negative, and it's like, that's a waste of time when you can look and literally see that there's nothing there. Do you have to prove it every time, or can you just do this logical assessment to get rid of most of it and then do a delineation when it's really obvious?
Right.
So that's kind of the goal, I think.
Right. And I think I can only speak definitively for our land use rules. And our land use rules aren't trying to create costs that are unnecessary for a property owner and developer. So that's why if you stay out of that area of uncertainty, I think it's very fair for a local code to not require the delineation. At the same time, you have to remember that if a developer or landowner kind of inadvertently wanders into developing in a wetland, they are violating state and possibly federal wetland laws. And so they will need to understand, what their potential liability is and take precautions to deal with those laws. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay.
And Murph, let's take your question. And then I think we're coming up on when we were hoping to have a bit of a break here.
Awesome. Thank you. I just wanted to mention too that after this meeting, I have another workshop with Clackamas County's planning commissioners on clear and objective standards. So this needs to be clear and objective because it's pretty fuzzy what we're working on now as far as habitat conservation areas, water quality conservation within an urban growth boundary. So if we're going to expand, this needs to be very clear. If there is.
Very true. And so our rule, our rule doesn't have to only use clear and objective language in what we direct the local government to do, but when they incorporate something into their code, it has to be clear and objective. So we do our best to try to have that also in our rule, just to make it easier for the local governments. But goal 5 within the division, there is a requirement there for both a clear and objective standards and an optional discretionary standard. Ironically, when you actually read that rule, it is should I go into this? In the standard goal 5 process, when you go through the ESEE and you come out the other end with a supported measures for local protections, it says there in that part of the division that those have to be clear and objective. Within the safe harbor protections, within our riparian rule and a little bit within this wetland rule, there is some subjectivity. So when a local government adopts a code to address what's in the safe harbor, they now need to tweak that to make sure that it's implemented in with at least a clear and objective path and then an optional subjective path. That might be gobbledygook to a lot of people, but
well, definitions is where I see some shortcomings. Definitions don't seem to sometimes match from one jurisdiction to another within the state. And I don't know if in the long run if we'll ever clear that up.
Yeah, let's pay attention to that and see if we don't at least make it any worse than it is.
Thank you.
All right, Kevin, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I know my brain is tired. Thank you for the really good questions. There's lots of other things I could say, but I'm not going to do that. Let's take a break. Maybe 10 minutes, well, a little less than 10 minutes now. Let's be back at 4:15. We'll have the last 45 minutes to talk through some specific concept areas in the kind of draft rule concepts. So looking forward to that, but let's be back here at 4:15. Thanks. Thanks for the note, Jabra. Appreciate it. It's helpful.
Sure. I keep talking when I'm muted.
All right. I think people are coming back. That was a short break. But hey, better some break than none at all, right? 2.5 hours. It's a bit. Especially when we're getting down into the details. This is good, though. I think building a shared understanding is really a critical step in this conversation. So there are no bad questions here. Hmm. Well, it's hard to know how many people are back, but I'm going to assume that the majority of folks are here. Amanda, I think we're looking to you to, Amanda, I think we're looking to you to step through the next piece, and we'll have some time for questions here as well. We're going until 5. Hopefully that works for people. And we'll just have a little bit to share with you at the end about like next steps and things to look out for in coming to you in emails soon. So go ahead, Amanda.
All right, thanks. All right, so our strategy here for this kind of condensed time for our rulemaking is, I think I said we have some rule language kind of penciled out, but we were hesitant to share all that language with you until we actually went over what we were doing, provided some context. And so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to overview where we are thinking that we need to make amendments. Am I on my, here we go, where we need to make amendments to the existing rule. And then, based on some conversation we might have this afternoon, and then what we hear from you afterwards, we will prepare a draft to then send out fairly quickly. So we are asking that any thoughts you have following this meeting about ideas for amending the rule be sent to us by December 22nd. We will put that together into a draft for review at the next RAC meeting. And so that will, of course, still be a draft rule, but it will be maybe like more cohesive, and we can really be talking about how well the language works to inform what local governments will need to do.
I just jump in, Amanda, and
Yeah.
I just want to say, we'll accept comments after the 22nd, but I think the point here is just to inform the next iteration of the rules. If you could send them to us by the 22nd. If they come after that, we're probably not going to be able to pivot and get everything kind of folded in. So that's why the deadline. And besides, we don't want to ruin your Christmas vacation. So.
All right, next slide, please. All right, so I'm just going to march through the rule. Some minor changes. Section 1 of the rule right now is definition. It's just the definition of wetland, and we think we're going to need to expand that a little bit to include at least 1 or 2 other definitions, probably at least a definition of uplands. Section 2 right now speaks to the relationship of the wetland rule. And when I say the wetland rule, I mean the 100 rule to periodic review and the standard goal 5 process. And these are other parts of the rule. So we're thinking that we're going to split the existing section 2 into speak specifically about UGB amendments in addition to the periodic review trigger for applying the rule, and then move the conversation about, or the part in the rule about that talks about the standard process, which is going back to the standard inventory and ESE. Well, there's no standard inventory for wetlands. It's only an LWI, but the standard process for determining local protection programs, just make that its own section. So then we would have section 3, which used to be section 2, but would be no change to that language. Next slide, please. So section 4 talks about the intersection with our rules, with DSL rules, and we've talked about that a little bit. It's DSL rules set the standards for doing a local wetlands inventory, and for which includes a functional assessment of wetlands. And so just some changes to how this section speaks to the intersection with DSL rules, just to, I think, make things be a little more clear. So no change to section 5, which is really what the description is for what cities need to do in order to protect significant wetlands within UGBs, and this isn't this is kind of what we know as developing a full Goal 5 program, and that can stay in the rule while and let's have the next slide, please. While we add a new section that speaks specifically to these UGB expansion areas. All right, so we keep the part of the rule that says this is what your city's local wetland inventory, how you go about it, how you develop your program. But when the city is really only applying Goal 5 to a UGB expansion area, we have a section of the rule that speaks to that only. So here, the risk of sound like a broken record, we're talking about an optional wetland avoidance program for areas that are added to a UGB. Of course, that's only when there are wetlands there. And then we would cities would allow development only in the upland areas until the LWI is completed. And this is where we are hoping for some input in order to flesh out this draft that we're working on. And the question is, what should the rule require as a commitment to adopting and implementing a wetland avoidance program? And when should this commitment be made? So in order to think about this question a little bit more, if we go to the next slide, I just have a couple ideas to kind of seed input. So when we've talked about it internally, we keep coming to this idea that it makes sense for the wetland avoidance program to live in the annexation code. So the annexation code, the rule, and that's the question, is the rule specific to say, make this change to your annexation code, or does the rule say something a little more general, and then through guidance, we say the city would implement it through their annexation code, and maybe there's other ways the city could do it. But essentially, we need to know, so when they're adopting when you adopt the UGB, at the time when the city is adopting the UGB amendment or expansion, then if the city at that point included something in their annexation code that described this wetland identification and avoidance approach, that could work as a way to confirm that this optional pathway would be followed. So I guess here I was kind of looking for another option here. So the city adopts provisions in their development code specific to the UGB expansion area, and requiring wetland delineation or determination of upland to inform buildable portions of a lot. So I think we've been leaning towards something that lives in the annexation code, but maybe there's something that could work a little bit further down the flow. Max?
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. I just want to kind of know what the thought process behind requiring it in the annexation code is. We had an instance with a developer who wanted to annex prior to development, but we couldn't annex. It was a long fought process because we were waiting for an LWI to be completed and adopted. And so they're like, well, we're not even going to be building anything. So why can't we just annex into the city? So I just kind of wanted to know what the reasoning behind having it for the annexation is.
So, I thanks for that question, because I was supposed to kind of preface this. So when a city already has something incorporated that assures implementation of the Goal 5 wetland rule, that followed the UGB expansion decision, if a city wanted to change that, like if we amend this rule, or let's say when we do amend this rule, and there is a pathway in this rule that is more attractive to the city, then the city can amend their code and possibly comp plan, depending how this works out, to be consistent with the new rule. So in the scenario you have, you already have a city code that's driving how things work, because we didn't have this optional pathway before. So and you're pretty far down the line in King City, so you might be cool with just keeping what you have, at least for the UGB expansion areas, that was added a couple of years ago. Maybe your next UGB expansion area, you'll decide you want to do things a little differently. But Independence is a city that also already has a prescribed approach in their code, and other cities do as well. And the point I want to make is, once we amend this rule, if a city wants to change the approach that they have embedded in their planning code, they can do so, and they would just make it consistent with the amended rule. Josh?
Yeah, along those lines, when you say annexation, I assume you mean into the city, not just the UGB expansion, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so a lot of times, almost most of the time, when you do a UGB expansion, you're also changing the zone and you're annexing. It's all at once. My thought would be you would identify that there might be an issue through that process, but you don't actually delineate until you develop. I mean, they could do it at any time, but I wouldn't want it to hold up the annexation, because a lot of times these companies are looking at, they need assurance, right? They need to know that this is it's zoned, it's ready to go. I can do this, but for maybe this delineation during development or whatnot. And then while they're working on their engineering and their infrastructure planning and all that stuff, they can be doing the delineation at the same time. Because again, those delineations also only last so long. I think they're 5 years.
5 years with the option of extending them another 5 years if you demonstrate that there hasn't been a big change to the hydrology.
Right. And so they don't want to have to keep doing things. So I have a 160 acres that we annexed years ago. It doesn't have any wetlands on it, but it's been sitting around for 10 years. It never did develop. So I would lean towards the development side of things, but maybe have some kind of caveat that something gets identified during the process, just so you don't forget about it. But
okay, thanks for that. I'm going to say that your experience with the annexation and possibly even zoning comes at the same time as the UGB amendment. I know of many situations where that's not the case. And then, so maybe Kevin and maybe Melissa can speak more to, because I'm not a planner, so they would be better to speak to the concept of tying the delineations to the annexation versus tying it to further down in the development steps.
I guess I can take a crack at that. I think fundamentally that the dynamic that we're addressing or we're thinking about here is, we could develop maybe a one-size-fits-all approach and put it maybe in rule that says, hey, local governments, you adopt this development code, blah, 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 here's how you do it. We're inclined to provide more flexibility as to how local governments want to approach that. What we know is that somewhere between the UGB, after the UGB expansion decision, but before permitting development, we need to make sure that this issue is addressed if we're going to use this interim approach. I suspect, I saw Glenn's hand up earlier, and I know King City is in Metro. There may be some wrinkles there where we're going to need to think differently about how that framework would apply within the Metro region, because again, Metro is kind of shepherding the UGB decisions for the region. but that's part of the issue. We could just say, look, every local government needs to adopt provisions in the development code that basically say, in this area, until such time as we have an LWI and Goal 5 program, development needs to either get a determination of upland or a delineation of a wetland and avoid any identified wetlands in the development area, with the exception of infrastructure, if infrastructure extension goes through there. That is one approach, but I'm not sure that it's going to work for every local government. So I think we want to hear a little bit about do you want a one size fits all? Is that make sense? Or is there a way that we can craft this a little more broadly to allow a variety of approaches? Honestly, I'll tell you, from a planning perspective, the best way to do it, in my opinion, you do a UGB expansion, you do a master plan, you address all 19 statewide planning goals for that area, and then only after that work is done, do annex and zone, and development is authorized. But many jurisdictions do not have the resources or time to do all of that work all at once, and we understand that. So, think about what makes sense from your, if you're with a jurisdiction or a consultant who's worked in a variety of contexts. That's kind of what we're interested in hearing. And I see a bunch of hands, so I'll shut up.
Thanks, Kevin. Charles, what do you got?
Yeah, I was just going to jump in real quick. We have two examples going on right now. The city of Phoenix is in the process of expanding their UGB and annexing and rezoning. And then same with the Eagle Point, that with the one-time expansion, UGB annexation. So those are two examples currently happening in our area.
Thanks. Glenn?
Thank you. Maybe this is just something for Metro to sort out, but knowing where bodies of water are, including wetlands, is necessary under Title 13 of our Urban Growth Management Functional Plan to inform other Goal 5 resources. And so I'm thinking about, and I still don't have it sorted in my head, how much either of these options on the screen would serve jurisdictions in the metro region, because maybe it's the case that a city could still not urbanize even upland habitat, upland in the verbiage here, until they have completed, in partnership with Metro, a fresh determination of where various Goal 5 resources are, which include needing to know where some wetlands are. So before we Metro would say, yep, it's okay for City X to go ahead and build over here, they will have already needed to complete a whole comprehensive plan for the expansion area that is based on sort of our Title 13 inventory. And maybe in certain particular pockets, it's clear that there's no habitat to be concerned with, but right now our sort of program works that they have completed comprehensive planning for the entire urban area, and that is informed by having known where the wetlands are. And so doing it piece by piece is something that we would have to sort through.
Okay. What I'm thinking is that Titles 3 and 13 were adopted after 1996, when what this rule dates back to. So this is an opportunity to dovetail what Metro does, and we could, sounds like we could put a separate provision, like, within, and for Metro, like we did for the cultural areas rule, like have a, and for Metro, these things also happen. Great. Brock?
Yeah, sorry, I hope you guys can hear me. I'm on the road. I was going to say, maybe it makes sense to have kind of like three pathways: one for metro cities, one when you're doing just the UGB expansion, one when it's UGB expansion and annexation at the same time.
Okay. Thanks.
I know it's more work, but
no, I mean, I think we need to cover cover all of our bases.
Mhm.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Ezra?
Yeah, thank you so much. And Kevin, I know you were maybe being a little glib there at the end, but I just want to highlight the fact that I don't think the ultimate outcome here is a process-driven system that necessarily works best from a box checking exercise. Respectfully, there are many expansions that are going to occur that for which master planning is not appropriate. And by highlighting that as a critical component for good planning, we inadvertently add hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to the cost of future developments and modest expansions. So I just want to level set that piece of it because while this planning work is obviously important, when it becomes the goal and it becomes the mission, we then have examples like we've heard about today where land will sit vacant for many decades and not be helpful. So I would recommend something along the lines of what Brock mentioned recently, which is kind of a metro-driven approach, and one or two options outside of that. But one again that does not rely on master level planning for UGB expansion areas.
Yeah, that's a fair point, Ezra. But I also want to clarify the intention of what I was saying is yes, in the best of all possible worlds, every jurisdiction would have time and resources to do that work. But we recognize that is not the reality. And so the rules that we're developing here are intended to address reality, not just the optimal. So I'm sorry if I didn't say that clearly, but that was my intent.
Right, Josh?
Yeah, Kevin, I agree with you. We'd love to master plan the whole city all the time, but that doesn't always happen. And it usually happens with more of a housing development. And I guess I'm always thinking about that industrial development. That was my context is we have a saying in Prineville, you got to move at the speed of business because you don't, you're going to miss your opportunity. And so when I'm thinking of those large lot industrial type lots, these businesses come in and they need assurances. They need a quick, like, yes, we can do this. And they can't wait for these little assessments. And if you can't annex the property with the UGB expansion, they're going to move on. So we need to have a little more of assurance and just give them the steps. They don't mind taking the steps, but they just need to know it can happen. And so if we can do something up front, you get them annexed and you go ahead and maybe you can identify something very basically like, this is a concerned area and they understand that and they're fine with it, then they can move on. But at least, and then part of the development, they do it. A housing development, I think, is a little easier because there's a lot more nuance to the development. It's not just a big, large lot type industrial, and you have a little more time. So if you wanted to break it up, you could do it by use. I would tend to just still make it part of the development, though. The annexation side of things, I can understand maybe in the valley it's really tough because you can't just identify something really easily. And so I know coming from the east side, it's fairly simple to know, well, there's the river, there's the lake, there's the pond, there's the green, there's the desert.
Mm-hmm.
And it's fairly simple to do, whereas maybe it's not over there and that's the issue. So I don't even know if you can break that into two different types of uses or maybe just give cities options to do their own. So the east side can kind of set up their own program and the west side might have a little bit different choice. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But on the business side of thing, it's just different than the housing side. So I wasn't even thinking about the housing part because that generally is, we work around those wetlands while they're developing their subdivision and their streets and they delineate at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just how it's typically done.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. I am looking at the time. I'm going to predict that we're going to run probably 5 minutes over, but I'm going to move on to the next slide because that's another new section and one that we will want your input on. And this is this question of transitioning from a wetland avoidance program to a full Goal 5 inventory and protection program. And so the question is, Well, one, when does it make sense for a city to maintain its wetland avoidance program? And maybe some of the stuff you're talking about, Josh, maybe sometimes if the idea is that their wetlands there will never be impacted, then and it's not going to affect buildable lands and the next UGB expansion so much, maybe there are times when to continue to just avoid all wetlands. I want to point out that within the construct of the land use program, the idea is that urban lands are for urban development unless there's a really good reason not to develop there. And the reason for that is we want to avoid expanding urban growth boundaries into resource lands, as much as possible. So it would not be a policy neutral code amendment if we were to have all cities proceed into the future with the wetland avoidance program and not transition to a Goal 5 program where the local government is only protecting those significant wetlands. So we think that at least most cities we will recognize will need to transition. And so how does that happen? And when should it recur? Is it do we set a time limit? How do we write a rule that says, okay, at some point you're going to be moving on and making sure that your LWI has been approved and your local program has been adopted? Yeah, we've got time for just a couple questions here. And so Josh, you've just been on the floor a lot. So I just want to make sure.
Okay, I'll let anybody else go.
Yeah, let's do that first. And then if nobody else has a question, then we'll. All right, go for it. Oh, wait a second. Murph.
Just a brainstorm. Why, instead of an avoidance program, why couldn't this be an inclusion in infrastructure and actually benefit the developments with the wetlands?
So you mean framing it as a way to sound more development friendly? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And make it a benefit for the neighborhood or for the development.
I think it's a really interesting point. I will have to think about whether that's something that the rule would speak to or whether it would be more how we present the rule to the public.
It would be housing friendly. It would make friendlier neighborhoods, so to speak. More than anyway. I think it'd be a plus, but I'll stop there.
Right, just thanks. So Sean, since you're also a frequent flyer, I'm going to go back to Josh and then take your question.
Okay, I guess so you're expecting the city to adopt this program? I thought it would live in the state.
No, right. Well, right now we have not had a conversation about the way we refer to it is if having the rule apply directly. So we do have some Goal 5 rules that say if the local government has not adopted their planning code to do something, then you just apply this rule directly.
Yeah.
The way we've been thinking about this rule is that it would set up a construct for the local government to amend their plans and codes in order to conform to the rule.
Okay. And to I think it was Murph's point, we kind of do use wetlands as infrastructure because we use them as overflow drainage. We use them as open space for developments especially for housing ones that require those types of things, cluster developments that may be used to avoid these types of things. And so they get, density credits if they transfer, all that kinds of stuff. We do use them for development techniques, and drainage is a big one. We don't directly drain our streets to them. They get filtered, but it is used that way. And so my initial thought was that this would live in the state and people could just, as the UGB expansion, which has to be approved through the state, would then, maybe there's a whole separate category on the state's wetland site that says these are avoidance wetlands based on Section 6. And then to get to the full Goal 5, honestly, no city is going to voluntarily do that. I don't think ours did, but it's
let me interrupt just for a second. I don't mean full Goal 5 for the city. I mean full Goal 5 for the expansion area, which is already required in the rule.
Okay. Yeah, I think that happens with development, and that's when it happens.
Okay.
When that site develops, it gets included. But
All right, Sean dropped off, and so actually we're doing great now. I'm going to move on to the next slide. But I'll just say that last slide is something that we would like to get some input on after this meeting. And I can go through these fairly quickly because so this section 8, which was currently section 5 of the rule, doesn't really concern us too much, although we have some rural folks here. So it talks about how the statewide wetlands inventory is used for it's about the wetland land use notice. I believe that's what this is, and basically just update to reflect the change that I think the rule now says you can adopt the local wetland inventory like it was a static thing, or not the local wetland inventory, the statewide wetland inventory, as if it was a static thing, and that doesn't really fit with how we use the statewide wetlands inventory now. So I've recommended some amendments to just say, look to the statewide wetlands inventory, which is how cities and counties do that now if they don't have a local wetlands inventory. Next slide. And actually now I am wrapping up because these last 3 sections of the rule would have no changes. And see if there's anything I wanted to mention about here. The only thing I'll say is when you do go and take a look at the current rule and look at or the amended rule that we will send you, note that this idea of a wetland conservation plan, and if you take the time to go look at ORS 196-668, it has only ever been used once in the city of Eugene and has not been used since. And DSL has had some conversation about changing their rules to make this local wetland conservation plan more achievable. But just warning, don't go down a rabbit hole with trying to understand this wetland conservation plan, because it's not something that really functions right now. All right, so I think this is time for overall questions before we go into our wrap up. Is that right, Kevin?
Right. Yeah, we just have next steps after this. So, I think we've had a really good conversation today. Hopefully people have a sense of kind of what we're focusing on, and where we're intending to go with the rules. I know for some people who are very expert and, some of this may have been redundant, but it really, really is important that we all kind of develop a shared understanding for sort of how this program operates. The complexity with wetlands is, we've got DLCD, we've got DSL, we have federal regulations. So there's a whole lot of things. What we're talking about is the piece that DLCD has some ability to affect, and we have a pretty clear direction from the commission about the scope of the work. So I think we've defined that very well. But I want to pause now if there are any just kind of bigger picture questions about this rulemaking, or anything we've talked about today. I see a hand, Sean.
All right, flying one more time. So I was looking at the statewide inventory, and there's just literally masses of brown, on both sides of Independence. So how might the avoidance situation work if literally the entire property shows as wetland on the statewide wetland inventory? Because as I understood it, you would still need to do either a delineation or an upland determination or something. But like, if the whole thing is showing as, potential wetland, does that just sort of eliminate the property?
So one point I want to make is that the hydric soils is an indicator of wetlands, but doesn't mean there's a wetland there. And if it was a wetland and it turned out through a delineation that the entire property was a wetland, then yes, the city would not be able to issue development permits for that property until, that's a good question. I'm going to answer it this way first, and then see if I change my mind. Until you went through the whole Goal 5 process, because through the whole Goal 5 process, you can use an ESE analysis to say, hey, there are some places where even if a wetland is significant, we need to allow development because of the economic and social consequences kind of outweigh the environmental consequences. So I answered it that way. The other thing I want to say is that a Goal 5 rule cannot make a lot unbuildable that was otherwise buildable, right? So a lot that's completely wetland under state and federal laws can be built as long as they mitigate the impacts of that wetland. And we can't add something that says, well, despite that, you still can't build. So I think the question of whether a wetland avoidance program as this interim could, for some period of time, create an unbuildable parcel, we will need to think about.
Okay, and just to that point, the mitigation, at least in our region, there are very few and potentially no mitigation credits left. So, without being able to mitigate, you basically are left with having to avoid. So that, just to your point about creating an unbuildable lot, basically, I think want to kind of raise that point, which may be what Matt's going to talk about too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, probably. Thanks, Sean. Yeah, I think there's no question like that it's reasonable like to think about defining some of these upland areas and allowing those to proceed with development as part of this process. I think the rub really comes, as Sean has kind of defined it here, that there may be some areas that are less significant that are kind of getting caught in this process where the city would contemplate allowing development and mitigation of those sites. But if we have to wait, a number of years for the local wetland inventory to be produced and then kind of approved or recognized by the state, and then you can start, through that process, you're talking about a pretty significant delay.
Mm-hmm.
So, I guess from my perspective, maybe unsurprising. I'm not sure we're going far enough in the sense of thinking about how some things that could be objectively defined as non-significant, or let's call it non-contributing in some way, that there isn't a process to also address those as part of this.
So I think that I'll call it my opinion, but the way I understand the directive that we have from LCDC is that what you just described as a different way of distinguishing a significant wetland from a non-significant wetland is not within the scope of this rulemaking, largely because that happens over at DSL rules. And it's also controlled by just the nature of what wetlands are and wetland, how wetland functions are identified. And the other thing I wanted to say is that, so the delay, so we have over the last few years seen some very long time periods for getting a local wetland inventory completed, submitted to DSL, reviewed by DSL, and then approved. Some of that delay is when the data that DSL gets is not complete. And there's, they take a while to look at the data, and then they're like, oh, it's not complete. And then they send it back. And then it takes time for that data, the additional data to be acquired, and then it goes back. And if that iteration happens, that's, partly how the data is collected or presented to DSL. The other is the staff that DSL has to commit to doing these reviews of the LWIs. DSL is hiring another person that does the same job as Jevra, and they've also worked out some approaches to speed up their ability to get LWI reviews through the system faster. So that's a really good positive thing on DSL's side. And then as far as getting the data to them in the first place, so there's not delays within that step is something this rulemaking can't affect, but something just we need to be aware of. And I guess the punctuation I want to put on here is that we are hoping that the time frame from getting a delineation, well, actually, maybe Jever, you could speak to us, but I'm trying to remember what Dana Hicks, Jever's manager, said, and I think thinking that maybe the whole LWI process could be completed in under 2 years. So including field work, delivery of the data, review by DSL would be under 2 years. It's still a long time, but it's not years and years.
I agree. I'm curious if Max is still on. If so I don't have it in front of me and he may not either, but I'm wondering how long it took for the Kingston Terrace West. That was a special case, but it got through the system pretty quickly.
Stacy would probably know that because she was the developer behind that was a developer initiated LWI. That started before I got brought on board.
Kingston Terrace West.
Yeah,
I think it
will take me a moment to look it up. So
I think it was 9 months. It was incredibly fast.
And part of that was because it was entirely delineated. So again, that was my point earlier, that if everything's delineated already, it's a much quicker review.
Thanks for that.
Thanks, Stacy.
So before I lose the floor completely and pass it back to Kevin, I just want to say that there, for people who are, have other ways of wanting to share their thoughts, just send me an email, or Kevin or Melissa, send us emails, and we can have conversations through email or through phone, and just make sure that your questions are answered and your input is absorbed by us. If doing that within this meeting format is less desirable for you.
I want to say it is our goal to be as transparent as possible. So if you have a good idea, we're going to share that with the group. We want everybody to see it. We're not going to keep anything secret here. It's an open and transparent process. But yes, absolutely, we're interested in your good ideas. Melissa, could you advance to the next slide? Okay, real quick, just next steps. A couple of things for you all to look for in your email inboxes in the next few days. First of all, our intent to send you draft rules within the next day or so. So we should have the draft rules for you to review and comment on. Again, we're hoping to hear back from you by December 22nd. You can say end of the day on the 22nd or whatever. I think it's a Monday. You can send those to me, you can send those to Amanda, send those to Melissa, send them to all of us. But basically those are we're the three people who should be included in that. Also, we will be sending out a doodle poll for RAC meetings in January, February, and the late April, early May meeting, just so we can get those on your calendar as soon as possible, get them on our own calendars and plan that out. Hopefully we can settle on those dates collectively and move forward. So, and the last thing, we will include also a copy of this slideshow with the draft rules. So if y'all want to go back and look over some of these pieces, that will also be included in the piece that we mail out with the draft rules. And that said, I just want to thank everybody today for your attendance and your good questions and engagement in this effort. I'm just really excited to be working with this group. We've got some a variety of perspectives, a lot of knowledge, and please don't be shy about sharing your perspective on these rules. Okay, are there some questions? I'm here. I can hang out. So, Josh, go ahead.
Yeah, I just have real quick. How do you guys prefer comments? Do you like bullet points? Do you like track changes? Do you like?
Track changes is great if you're willing to do it in that way. If you have specific text, but also general comments are fine. So whatever you are most comfortable doing. If you're saying, don't do it this way, do it that way in more general terms, that's fine too. Thanks for asking.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I
Matthew.
just had just a quick request. I know earlier we talked about some of the draft rules having an interplay with the DSL rules. And just for those where there kind of is that, or if there you think there's an interaction, would you be able to also provide us with a couple of those cross references just so we can see those together?
They are in the rule already. So if you look at the rule language, it references when
Oh,
a
the references
DSL
are
rule.
those are the ones you're already talking about. Got
Yeah,
it.
it's
Okay.
already in
Thank
there.
you.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you.
And the draft rule has some updates to those references.
That's great. Thank you so much.
If you're a real administrative rules nerd, you will know that whenever you see 660, those are DLCD's rules. The three numbers that precede a rule, if they're different from 660, they're not ours. So that's likely DSL rules that are being referenced.
141 is DSL rules.
There we go, 141. All right. Thank you very much. Y'all have a good evening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, everybody.